It is a pleasure to be here, and I'm learning as I go with this new job, and I learned something just a few minutes ago that with my Agbu hat on, I'm not supposed to throw in hand grenades, I guess, to the crowd. I didn't know that, so I don't know what I've got buried in this talk. They'll have to take out. So first I'll start with the title. Lucinda gave me the title, and at first I thought, oh, geez, that's a bit controversial, maybe in some ways. Maybe I should change it. And I thought, no, that's okay. We'll run with it. But I was thinking of some alternatives, and the next one here, instead of multibreed is coming, multibreed, a long time coming. You know, when I was actually in Armidale in 1995 as a visiting PhD student from Canada, and my thesis topic was around multibreed genetic evaluation of beef cattle. So that is a long time ago, and we're still, it seems, we're making some progress, but you know, this is not a new topic. It's been coming for a long time, and I think as we look around the world, and I've been involved with doing some multi-breed evaluations, it's not really the technology, it's really the data sets that have to come together to make it all work. And so what we're going to talk about today is some of the data sets coming together here in Australia to allow multi-breed evaluations to come together. But the other point I'd like to make at the end is, in some ways, multi-breed has been here all along. If you look at sheep evaluations in Australia, it is a big multi-breed genomic evaluation done right here in Australia with software at Agbu. You know, the databases and all that, you know, it can be done when the environment's right in terms of the data. People want to put the data together and do it. It really comes down to the data really more than the software. So I think if you've been at Agbu for a while, and you'll hear things in the industry like, well, how come, you know, the scientists at Agbu don't know how to do multi-breed, but other people seem to be able to do it? Well, people at Agbu have been doing multi-breed actually for a long time when the data's there to do it. So what are 3 ingredients that we might need to do a multi-breed genetic evaluation in Australia? Number 1 is we need the software in theory to handle the data, and I kind of argue that is done. You know, we could, I think we could do a good job with good data for a multi-breed evaluation. That's pretty much already in place. We need the data structure to compare the breeds, and I'll show you some of those trials that are going on here in a minute, but I'd say that's coming. And in the last one there, we need some interest from parties to combine data sets, and I've got a question mark there, and maybe I'll come back to that at the end. So, you know, why multi-breed? And maybe before I get into my questions there, kind of explaining what is a multi-breed evaluation, what would it look like? You know, right now, if you come to Rennie Lee's bull sale, you can look at the EBV figures on the bulls, and you might see, for example, don't know what the number, 60 kilograms for 400-day weight or something like that. And then you drive over to Wairuna and you look at a bull and he's got 60 kilograms for 400-day weight. But those two numbers are absolutely not comparable, and that's what Wayne just showed you in his talk. You know, the 60 kilograms in Angus is not the same as 60 kilograms in Herefords. They're not comparable. So what would a multi-breed evaluation look like, and that's even more what we see in sheep, is you could say, well, if I pulled up at Rennie Lee and I looked at the bull and he was 60, and I pulled up at Wairuna and I looked at the bull and he was 60, those two numbers are comparable. If I bred them to a cow of a third breed, you know, if I had shorthorn cows, I could use either of those bulls, and the calf weights should be pretty much the same. They're comparable. That's really what we want to get to. So, and if you think about what would a multi-breed evaluation look like as kind of all singing, all dancing, you know, where all the data's in there, while we would have the Herefords and the Angus and all the breeds and all the crosses could be composites or whatever you have could be contributing data into one big evaluation. That's really what multi-breed would look like. So why would we be interested in that? I guess on one hand, you could say, well, you know, the system as it is, you know, let's face it, if you look at the genetic trends, and I was sitting yesterday with Ian in the morning, and he was showing, you know, the genetic trends in his herd, and you can see, let's face it, the breeders that are making good progress, right? We can't say the system as it is not good, because the purebred breeders are actually making great gains, and that's a good thing. So why do multibreed? Well, on one hand, I don't think we could argue that you're never worse off to be better informed. And I guess it's more, I think, about commercial buyers, that they're better informed when they're trying to make crossbreeding decisions. Why do we want crossbreeding? Wayne showed you the advantages of heterosis and things like that, but it's difficult to implement a system if you're trying to pick, well, I've got shorthorn cows and I want to do some crossbreeding. I could pick Hereford bulls or Angus bulls, but I can't compare them. So that makes it difficult to make the decision. So I think you're always better off to be better informed. This next one is maybe a little bit difficult for you to interpret if you just read it, but now that if we actually put all the breeds on the same base, you as commercial buyers are better informed. So you could say, well, I have been going to breed A. I had no idea really how they compared to breed B. Have I been worshiping at the wrong church? Should I switch churches? Should I try this other breed? Because I'm better informed in terms of how these breeds compare, and that's what multi-breed's going to have. And I guess what Wayne showed is just the variability in the breeds, right? In terms of, yes, I forget the example of the trait, but you had, on the one hand, you had the best IMF was actually from the Hereford sire, although Angus were significantly better for marbling than the Herefords. But in that case, there's good and there's a lot of variation in all the breeds. And I think good cattle in any breed probably has a place. And let's get them ranked on together and evaluate them for what they are. That's the goal. So what do we need? And I'll start off here with what we call a crossbreed adjustment table. And Wayne talked about the Meat Animal Research Center in Clay Center, Nebraska, and I'll show you some results from that here in a minute. But if you've never had a chance to get there and you ever get to America on a tour or something, it's definitely a very interesting place because they've got, going back to the 70s or 60s, I forget, they've had a cow herd there of like 9,000 cows in a research environment, long-term, funded by the government, which, if you follow the politics in the U.S., is always a little dodgy because the government runs out of money and they give them a little extra and they run out of money and, they're actually going to keep funding these things. But they funded this research station for a long time, 9,000 cows, and a big part of the project is what they call the germplasm evaluation program. And that is, it's a big program to basically compare all these breeds. So when I was with American Angus, there's something like 200 sires from Angus that they've used AI in that herd. And every couple times a year, they would ask for us, send us the updated EPDs, EBVs on all those bulls, and we send them to them, and they get them from all the breeds, and they do this big analysis to come up with how do the breeds rank genetically for all the traits. And it's very powerful, and it's basically what we call in the crossbreed adjustment table. And I don't have the website here, but if you go to the Beef Improvement Federation in the U.S., there's actually a link now right off that homepage, and you can look up what the adjustment table is. And basically what it is, we've got Angus EBVs and we've got Hereford EBVs, but there's a way you can take the adjustment table and you can say, what do I need to add to the Hereford EBV or subtract or whatever to put them on an Angus base? So we can take all the EBVs from all the breeds, put them back on an Angus base, and the commercial breeders then are better informed. So that's one way, to do multi-breed. That is not putting all the data together. I worked at American Angus, and there's no way they're going to send their data off to be, in with the other breeds. But through the USDA, they're getting the comparison, and there's actually a way to put the data together, and that's in a crossbreed adjustment table. And that's one thing that multi-breed could look like. It's actually a very interesting research station to go to because it's right in the middle of the U.S. by design. At the time, not for a research station, but for its previous life as a ammunition storehouse for the Army and the Navy and everything else. And they put it in the middle of the country because if you were to pull up with a submarine and launch missiles to try and blow up your ammunition store, it's the middle of the country, so it's really difficult to get at. And so they have all these bunkers, these concrete bunkers that are all designed that if one blew up, it wouldn't blow up the others. and they're all covered with grass, so you can't see them from airplanes and things like this. But now it's basically cattle are just grazing. These things would cost so much to demolish that there's just cattle grazing over all these old ammunition stores and things at this previous military facility, but now it's covered in cattle. It's a really interesting place. So what about, instead of a crossbreed adjustment table, what about one analysis where we're actually going to take, the data right now largely sits with the breed societies. So in the north, you got Brahman Society or Drought Master Society, Santa Gertrude Society, etc. What about actually putting all those databases together and generate one number that's comparable across the breeds? And I think in terms of doing that, we're likely to see it perhaps in the north before we see it in the south, and I'll show you why here in a few minutes. And finally, what about crossbreds? Could actual crossbreds actually be a source of data themselves? So if we're getting carcass records and people are doing crossbreeding, we've actually could have good data coming from crossbreds, and how do we get that into the analysis? I guess one thing to point out is, in my beginning when I said, multi-breed's been here all along, in breed plan analyses, there are some multi-breed evaluations going on in terms of we're doing it for a certain breed, but that breed actually has crossing, and we've got some crossbred groups of animals and things, and they've got data, and that data, and we adjust for heterosis, and we adjust for breed effects, and that is actually all happens in the breed plan model today. So that's, again, how the software is pretty much already there. So this is the data from US Mark, and this was 2018, so the Mark Tallman and Larry Keene at US Mark. And what it shows is they've been doing this multi-breed evaluation work to compare the breeds for quite a while. But if you actually use the genetic trends in the breeds, and you show it's really interesting, I think, to show what's happened, because we have in our minds, how breeds rank. Let's say we saw today, well, Angus have got more marbling than Herefords. But things have changed quite a bit over time. And when I went to school and, graduated from my undergraduate in like 1992, way back here, we were taught, and when you looked at the data, this yellow line here is Simmental. So this is yearling weight. Simmentals are a lot bigger than Hereford and Angus. Hereford and Angus were kind of a medium-sized breed, and Simmentals were big, and that's how it was in 1992. And I think, if you don't have any new information, and you don't do anything with Simmentals, you think, well, that's just the way it is. But what's happened over time with genetic trends, Simmentals they've continued to get a little bit bigger, but they've stayed relatively flat compared to some of these other breeds. So Angus have been getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And today, well, this is 2016, and I think if you look at those lines, you see they're pretty much kind of straight, so you kind of imagine where they might be today in 2022. The story's pretty much the same. Angus now, at a year of age, according to the US Mark data, are heavier than Charolais, they're heavier than Simmental. And if, back in my, what you were taught in school in terms of the Continentals are big and high growth, and the British are more moderate, that doesn't actually fit anymore. And that's probably more the reason why you need a current multi-breed evaluation, so we can accurately compare these animals. The graph I don't have, because it's newer information, it was released a couple years ago, they kind of add traits as they go along, and they've added mature cow weight to the breed comparison. And guess who's got the biggest cows for mature size? Angus. Angus cows, on average in America anyways, are bigger than Charolais cows. They're bigger than Simmental cows. So that's I think is quite amazing to see what's changed. And we'll talk a lot about cow size later, and why it's so important, and why it costs money, and why having the biggest cows in the world may not be the best thing. But anyways, those are averages. So what about other traits? Birth weight, for example. Well, I showed you that graph with Simmental where they haven't been making the gains in live weight, but look what they did to the birth weights. They've actually did the best job maybe of actually reducing their birth weights in terms of improving calving outcomes, which was one of their maybe problems back in 1992. So that's significant. But like Wayne was showing earlier, where the average of, average of one breed is like the top 1% of the other, look down here where Angus is for birth weight compared to, say, for Charolais. If I don't know what the numbers would look like, but you're probably, even some of the heaviest animals in Angus are kind of more like an average Charolais. But those are the type of things you can get from a multi-breed evaluation. So there's two big projects I'd like to talk about, one in the north and one in the south. The one in the north is called Repronomics, and that's, I think David Johnson has actually got a trademark on the term. It's reproduction and genomics is where the term comes from. It's been running since 2013, and it's currently set to run through to 2024, so it's a long-term thing, and it runs on research stations in Queensland and one in the Northern Territory. And I guess when you look at the, why was it set up, it wasn't necessarily set up to say, now we can do a multi-breed evaluation, but what we'll see here in a minute is it's actually putting cattle together, multiple breeds, running head-to-head in the same environment, which is what you need to be able to pull these breed effects apart. So we'll get to that in a minute, but the big thing is this Repronomics project is really focused on female reproduction, hence the repro in the name. And why is that so important? And that is if you're, I guess, anyone, and I know there's some people here that are dealing in that environment, but reproduction, and as Wayne showed, reproduction drives profit, and there's some big issues with reproduction in the Bos indicus cattle. And so how do we actually get some data to help improve those traits? And basically it's going to be applying some new technologies in terms of recording and some different traits. So what's the big aim there is basically increasing number of animals with accurate reproductive EBVs for Northern Australia. And where's the work done? It's basically done at around Australia, and we've got 3 different breeds involved: Drought Masters, Brahmins, and Santa Gertrudis. And the bit of a design where you've got less and less Bos taurus and more Bos indicus as we get north. And up in the top, it's basically straight Brahmins, and some tropical composites have just recently been added to that mix. So that's where it is. And focusing on female reproduction, it's using technology. There's actually a lot of, these are expensive, it's an expensive project because there's a lot of scanning going on in terms of reproduction and maiden heifers here. We're doing repeated ultrasounds every 4 to 6 weeks to get age at puberty based on the first corpus luteum identified, and then in first calf cows to get that post-calving and estrus interval, again finding that corpus luteum. So that's done with a lot of scanning, and as the director of AgBoo right now, I have to sign off on all those bills that roll in for all the scanning work that gets done. So it seems there's a lot of it going on. The other thing is it's all done, there's natural mating happening in terms of, so all across all the heifers and those first calvers, so we can get accurate days to calving data and accurate estrus interval on those first calvers. So that's it's really great data. And I think if we look across the breeds in Australia, what's missing is good days to calving is a good trait when you have the data, and we're starting to lose the data in a lot of the breeds because of all the AI now that happens in studs on heifers. But in the research station here, they're basically getting that data for all those breeds. So far there's been close to 8,000 calves generated, 3,500 animals with age at puberty, 2,300 at estrus intervals. All the steers, it's a slightly different project, but those steers go on to something like a bin project to get all the carcass data, and there's about 2,700 of those. And what we'll see is all the data basically flows into breed plan for those breeds. So we talked last night briefly kind of about genomics and things, but and Wayne's absolutely right. Genomics gives you a better pedigree. But the breeds we need the data, the better pedigree combined with the genotypes to come up with more accurate breeding values. And so the data itself is the key. And this is high quality data that's going to drive genomically enhanced EBVs for these breeds for those traits that they're sorely lacking at the moment. So what does it look like when you start to compare sires for some of these traits? So heifer age at puberty here for Brahman sires, and it's really quite amazing when you look at the range. So these are the sire adjusted means. There's basically a 9-month difference in bulls in terms of when their daughters became pubertal, right? That is, I guess when you consider calving seasons and wet and dry and everything else, basically she's going to calve this year, she's going to calve next year. That's kind of the difference, and that's the range there are out there amongst Brahmins. And without the data, let's face it, you can go to a bull sale and they're just big, beautiful Brahman bulls, and why wouldn't you buy one? But you could have bought one. You could have bought this one, or you could have bought this one. And without the data, you just don't know the difference. So the data. How are we worse off when we're better informed? We're not. The information is always a good thing. So the problem at the moment, our EBVs are not comparable across breeds. We think with at least these 3 breeds of Brahman, Santa Gertrudis and Drought Master, they could be using this data as kind of an anchor point where all the breeds are compared head-to-head in the same environment, running together. They could actually provide the anchor to actually untangle the breed effects and actually line them up in a multi-breed evaluation. And that's why it's been running a lot longer than the one I'll show next. There's quite a bit of data here, and there's probably getting close to enough to actually think about, could we actually start to trial a multi-breed evaluation for some of these breeds if that's where people want it to go. And these are real pictures from the project, and you'll just see those breeds actually running in the exact same environment on different stations in different places. But again, it's that head-to-head. The issue at the moment is, although Ian's just down the road and Rennie Lee's right here, and you might say, well, this is all pretty good grazing country. Why can't I compare Ian's 200-day weights to Rennie Lee's 200-day weights? But that is kind of the folly of genetic comparisons around the world. The animals actually have to be together in the same environment, in the same paddock, weaned together, managed together. There's a lot of environmental variation, even within the same what you call macro environment here, where it's basically not too much different. So that's the key really to multi-breed evaluation, is you got to have the data sources where the animals are compared fairly so we can compare them. I thought this one is actually, these are some research EBVs. What happens if we put all the data together and we have here differences in days to calving, and we have each of those colors is a different breed, and what you'll see here, the blues are Brahmins, but what you'll see here is we've got animals. I'm not too sure blues or Brahmins. I'm not too sure which of these. I think David's point is maybe he doesn't show the colors yet, but the point is all these different breeds are scattered all across this whole range. So we actually have, again, good and bad in all the breeds.
Must be
Reds are Brahmins? Well,
you see the good ones are down on the
yeah. But now if he switched the colors around, we've actually got this one here is he's actually got the breeds listed, but we've got Brahman. There's a Brahman bull there, and there is most of the Brahmins are way out to the right hand side. So in terms of age at puberty, there are Brahmins that there is a Brahmin that actually is the best for age of puberty, but most of them are actually the worst, as you might expect if you think about Santas and Drought Masters, and they got Boss Taurus in them compared to a straight Brahmin. So that's the type of thing that you're going to get in a multi-breed evaluation. So that's what's happening in the north, and that's, I think, probably, if you think about opportunities to put things together. What about in the south? And so basically New South Wales DPI and the university and MLA is funding a large project at the moment to compare these breeds. Again, the Brahman is in there really to link in with that northern reproduction project. So same sires, and I'll show it in a minute. The same sires, so it's all linked together. And then we got Herefords and Charolais and Wagyu, Shorthorn and Angus, and that's based on breed plan participation in breed plan, like what are the breeds that actually have the biggest impact in terms of breed plan, and that's how those got picked originally. And what's the objective? Really, the primary objective is let's get these breeds, put them in the same environment, and compare them head to head to create a resource. And when I first arrived in Australia, I was talking with Sam Clark at UNE, and he said something that really rang true with me. He goes, Steve, in America you've got Meat Animal Research Center. This is like Australia's version of the germplasm evaluation program. Let's put these breeds head to head on the New South Wales DPI research stations, so we can start to do breed comparison work. And that's essentially the biggest. So DPI's got 17 research stations, and the cattle are spread across 5 of them across the state. And basically, there's quite a bit of diversity. So you've got Trangie, you've got Wayne talked about the Grafton Research Station, and gets a bit more on the fringe of tropical-like conditions. And then you've got Glen Innes up not too far from Armidale, and you got Glen Innes there in July. So even season to season, place to place, around the country, you've actually got quite a bit of variation in terms of the production environment. Again, those are the breeds that we're working with. Brahman ties in at Grafton, and the point is, at the moment, it's actually a little bit different. The USDA, if I've seen the presentation many times, and I always come out a bit confused. They've got a very complicated structure, and it's not purebred to purebred. There's F1 sires, and it gets a bit complicated to untease it all. But this is pretty simple. It's actually purebred Herefords versus purebred Angus. They went out and they actually bought females from different studs and actually put them together on the stations. So that's a bit unique, but that's also pretty powerful. And the progeny for steers will be fed out in terms of feed efficiency. So if you ever get a chance to get to Talimba, just outside of Armidale, there's a research feedlot there, and there's going to be Vitelli. I was going to say Grow Safe, but it was Grow Safe when they bought them, but now Andrew's there. Vitelli individual feed intake units there, as well as measuring methane production through green feed technologies, and of course getting all the carcass data back on those animals and heifers for reproduction. So it's actually not just comparing these animals head to head. It's actually a data source for the breeds themselves. It's expensive data being collected on these animals that can flow into breed plan, which is going to be powerful in itself. The other thing is this is a research trial, and my colleague there, Brad Walmsley, literally I think stays up all night in terms of the design and to make sure it's fair, right? So if we're not running a stud. We don't have a bunch of stud Angus animals and a stud Hereford animals. We're trying to produce good bulls or anything. It's literally we want to fairly evaluate the genetics. So we want to do things like randomly assigning sires to dams, so there's no bias in the data, and that's got to be done fairly carefully, and we want to avoid inbreeding and all of that. So the whole mate allocation, so we can compare these animals across all the sites, becomes important. And basically evaluating all the animals. It's not well, these ones we had to call, so we won't put their data in or something like that. All the data goes in, and that's a benefit from of running it at a research station. So basically, if you think about all the breed plan traits, we'll get all of those plus new data. And the new data, similar to what I showed you for the repronomics work in the north, is happening in the south. So again, directly comparable, really good reproductive data in terms of certainly days to calving, but also this first lactation and estrus. Matt's, I won't steal his thunder, he's going to talk all about this next, but he's doing all those measurements are happening on these sites as well. And we're doing a bit of work around horns. You think, well, we've got a genetic test for polled. Why do we need to do any more? The issue is scurs. And the problem is, from an animal welfare point of view, and I think in the future, we've got when we're taking horns off cattle and we've got some that are polled and some that are horned, the problem is one that's scurred, they come off as well. So we're actually kind of dehorning animals that don't need to be. But if we actually had a genetic test for that, we can actually, the idea would be, could we get a genetic test and get rid of scurs? That's the goal, and that's Natalie Connors, and she's doing all that work. I'm going to just skip over a few things here to kind of give you an idea where we're up to, but there's about, over the sites, we've got about 1,600 cows and 600 heifers. So I say, roughly, people say, how big is the project? It's about 2,000, a little over that, I guess, if you put those two numbers together. And as for bulls, there's a wide range, and it's important to have a wide range of sires. So we actually collect. We don't. They were all, like Wayne said, they're not all low growth for one trait or not all high growth for the other breed or something like that. But you actually need a cross section of the industry. They got to be current. Where are things going? We don't need to use bulls from 1992. But you'll see here 268 different AI sires used to date, as well as 110 backup bulls. So those backup bulls, DPI staff are actually buying bulls at bull sales. You might see them around to get industry bulls into the program as backup bulls. So they're all, they got to be on breed plan and everything, so we can compare the data. And just to some idea about the linkage. There's linkage of sires that are used across the sites, but there's also linkages of sires used to past projects. We've got projects that have run in Australia in terms of beef CRC, where some animals have been compared. We've got the Northern Repronomics Project. We've got the bins, so the Angus bins and the Hereford bins. Let's get data from those sires in this project as well. Again, it's all about connections. We don't want to have islands of data where we've got this data set over here, but these animals aren't related to these ones, so we can't compare them. Make those linkages, so if we can, in the future, do the best we can to bring all of those together. The one thing I should mention is, in terms of the Brahmin, is really a way to link into the Repronomics Project, and the Brahmins are only used at Grafton. So the calves that are weaned basically are following on the what we see in terms of the cows that are mated. So I'd like to wrap up. Obviously, that's a really big project, and I acknowledged the funders before, but there's, again, really led by Department of Primary Industries, staff at the top there, with Sam Clark from UNE, but there's a lot of, it's a big project, and it's expensive work to do. So I'd like to change the title around again to Multibreed is coming, to Multibreed, we're getting there. I think we've got the software, and we got the theory. The data sets are coming together, so I think you could say we're getting there. I've got thinking of another saying that a colleague of mine used to use. He says, we talk about this or that, or we're going to do this. And he says, well, as my mom always said, Lord willing and the creek don't rise, we're going to do that, Well, what my mom would say was, where there's a will, there's a way. And I guess I'd like to end this talk with, I think we have the way. So where there's a will, there's a way. I think we have the way. And I'm gonna leave it there.
Any questions for Steve? Anyone got any questions about multi-breed, all that? Those are massive investments by industry, probably $30 million by MLA. Yep, love to.
So you talk about linking in with Australian projects. What about having multi-breed analysis across the world, like what Pixie using? So you're using all Australian styles with that. Is that something you're considering? Obviously, your background with that stuff.
Yeah, I'll repeat the question. So the question was, I talked a lot about linkage with different projects here in Australia, but what about links to other multi-breed evaluations around the world? So the example that was given, IGS in America. So maybe just give background for people here. You're familiar with Breed Plan here in Australia, and we've got Breed Plan EBVs for Hereford and Angus and the different breeds. In America, if you look at what the genetic evaluation landscape looks like, you've basically got American Angus, in terms of Black Angus, runs their own evaluation. And then you have American Herefords, which run an evaluation, and I think they join in with some other countries, but it's Herefords. And at American Angus, we run some evaluations for other breeds. So we ran Charolais, and we ran Maine Anjou, Canadians and Americans and things like that. But then the American Simmental Association, what's called this International Genetic Solutions Evaluation, basically combines pretty much everything else. Simmental and Red Angus, Gelbvieh, Limousin, and they put all their data together into one evaluation. That's essentially what it looks like in the US. So the question is, here in Australia, we're putting together, trying to make linkages to combine the data sets here, but what about, say, linking in with an evaluation like IGS? And that really comes down to things that are really out of our control, because, the IGS in that case, are they going to be interested to combine into a multi-breed evaluation with Australia? That's something that people would have to probably do a lot of work on. And I guess my own experience in terms of the politics and the business case and everything else, I wouldn't hold out for that to actually be just around the corner or anything like that. I think that would be pretty difficult, because there's competition there, in terms of business competition. But the one of the benefits we have in beef cattle that we don't have in sheep is we get a lot of artificial insemination used. And so if we were to look at the databases for Angus here in the States, or Angus here in Australia versus the States or Canada, there's actually quite a bit of linkage in terms of bulls that are used. And if you look at the Angus bin, you'll see some American bulls used in the Angus bin. So there are linkages between Australia and North America. Technically, there is ways to put them together because of those linkages, but it's really not a technical decision. It's more of a business decision for the people that own the data. And are you going to, what's the advantage of doing an evaluation that's joint? So.
What happens to the Bosnian breeds in America?
Yeah, so quite a bit. I guess that's the one huge contrast really between America and Australia. And you think about the geography in terms of your I forget the weighting. It's like you're like 60% the north and 40% in the south. In terms of production. So your Brahman and your Indicus influence here is much bigger than in the US. Just to give you an idea, where I sit in Armidale, that is basically like Jacksonville, Florida in the US. If you think of a map of the US, you've got the top of Florida there, and you got that little bit that sticks down. That's kind of the furthest south you can go. That's where everyone goes to retire, because it's like tropical and you don't need to get a passport. So that's Florida, but that's I could drive from 8 hours or something and be pretty much down to the bottom of Florida. So if you think about where Armidale is, that's as far south that's as far tropical as the States gets. And so there's not a lot of it. And but as for what they would in America, they'd say that's all the eared breeds. So the Santas and the Drought Masters and the Brahmins. And for some of those, like Santa Gertrudis, etc., they're done. So Neogen, who there's a person by the name of John Janot that actually did a lot of work with all those eared breeds and did their evaluations. And Neogen bought their company, and now they're basically doing those evaluations. Yeah, so I did slip up there at the beginning to say, well, there's Angus and Hereford and what happens at IGS, but I left out all the eared breeds, but that's there.